are there any archaeological data for giant skeletons? So I asked the same question when I had Becca several weeks ago, who has masters in biblical archaeology, and I was like, please, Becca, tell me that we have some data. Tell me that all those Photoshop photos from these, and tell me that at least one is true. When you see archaeologists, and then you know their whole body is big, like a skull of all those giants. Like, please tell me. And I have some books from L.A. Marzulli. I'm like, please tell me something is true. She was like, no, I'm sorry, none of that is true. I'm like, come on, like you're just ruining my mood. I want it to be true. I seriously want it to be true. And I was like, what about all those conspiracy theories that Smithsonian has tons of all these giant bones and skeletons? She said, nope, none of that is true. So I just wanted to ask you, as another person, maybe there is 1% hope, so you can tell me that you found some data of giant bones or skeletons. Please tell me.
Well, uh, firstly, I'm going to say, um, well, getting back to what you said earlier, thank you for your kind words about my work, and yeah, it's great to have people prepared to make a little effort and put in some thought and consideration about these topics because yeah, they're not in the Bible for no reason. Um, but yeah, getting back to archaeology, I was watching that episode with Becca. I thought it was great, and I'm going to agree with her. But I also have some other things to say about that. Um, archaeology is interesting because it forces us to go beyond simply textual witnesses, right? When you read ancient literature, a lot of it is storytelling. So there's a temptation to say, well, they're telling a story, they're free to exaggerate, they're free to use a bit of poetic license. They're going to say things like, oh, we were like grasshoppers in their sight, as we see in Numbers 13, or, in Amos chapter 2, they're as tall as the cedar trees. We read that and we think, right, well, if archaeology is going to help us here, then we need to see giant bones, right? That's what we need to see. We want to see, a human femur bone that's, 7 feet tall. And if we don't find that, then we haven't found the biblical giants, right? That's what we're all looking for. The reality is a little different, and we've talked um, about the realistic size of the giants already. So, what are we expecting to find? Um, Now, the execration texts from Egypt were interesting because they um, brought to light the fact that the Egyptians were uh, terrified of these people that they called the Shazu, who were described in other Egyptian sources as uh, being of some considerable height. I think uh, somewhere around 8 feet 6 inches. I think was the conversion, right? So again, that's literary, but I mean, we find um, these pieces of pottery, right? Because the execration text was, basically like a bowl. You would write things on the bowl, like a curse or something against these people that you didn't like, and then you smash it, right? And because you've broken the thing, the words can't be taken back, right? So it's a curse with a permanent effect. That's the idea, right? So even the Egyptians were terrified of these people. But there's heaps more. A few years ago, there was a paper released by the archaeological team excavating the site of the biblical city of Gath, which, of course, we know as the birthplace of Goliath, the giant. Okay, so they're exploring the 11th to 10th century BC layers, so corresponding to the time of David and Goliath, and they discovered some interesting stuff. The thickness of the city walls happens to exactly match in the number of cubits employed with the height of the giant Philistine as recorded in the earliest manuscript traditions of the Hebrew Bible, excluding the Masoretic text. The discovery has led to talk of Goliath himself as perhaps not really a giant, but rather a literary representation of the city of Gath, a way of embodying the strength of the city by personifying it as a giant soldier. But this interpretation is not without its flaws. Um, so there's a number of reasons why it's incoherent to arrive at the conclusion that Goliath may not have been a giant on the basis of this discovery. The biblical text explicitly refers to Goliath's height in 1 Samuel 17:4, and there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span, 4 cubits and a span if you're reading the original or the earliest manuscripts. Uh, Height, of course, is not the same as thickness, right? I mean, even pre-scientific people are well aware of that. The words are not easily confused either. You've got gobar, which is the word for height, against rochab, which is thickness. You can find biblical examples of this usage, right? They're not easily confused. Okay, so height and thickness aren't the same. If a comparison or some kind of simile was intended, it would have made more sense to use consistent dimensions. So, Goliath's height versus wall height, or Goliath's thickness, maybe a measurement of his chest or something, versus the wall thickness, right? If that's the comparison you're trying to make, then some consistent measurements would probably be employed. Drawing a comparison between different dimensions, height versus thickness, is problematic and not really an effective illustration. Especially as a literary device. I mean, the words are there on the text, and they're very different. Um, Now they have a different cubit um, seen at the site of Tel Es Safi. It's 54 centimeters, or 21 and a quarter inches for those who use freedom units, as opposed to the common cubit of 18 inches, which was the standard in the region at the time. So that would actually make Goliath taller. Okay, so if we want to say that these units of measurement corresponded to Goliath's height, then suddenly we've turned him from 6 feet 9 to 7 foot 11. That's not an argument for taking away from his height. Biblical authors generally make less of Israel's enemies rather than glorifying them. So making Goliath any bigger actually works counter to the narrative. There's also nothing else in the description of Goliath that's been shown to correlate with any other aspect of the city of Gath, save for the fact that he came from there. So, I mean, this makes the single coincidental statistic seem a bit out of place. Like, maybe it's a bit of a stretch to apply those things. And adding to the cognitive dissonance of this suggested correlation is the fact that the battle in which Goliath is defeated doesn't take place at Gath, nor does that city fall in the aftermath of said battle. It would have been presumptuous to compare Goliath's death with the anticipated fall of a city that was clearly still standing at the time. So the story doesn't even work. The repeated title Goliath of Gath serves not to equate Goliath with Gath, but to associate him with the Anakim, who were said to be of great stature, as per Numbers 13, which we've talked about, and known to have fled there at the conquest of Canaan under Joshua, which we've seen in Joshua 11, verse 22. The association reminds us that he comes from a land of giants, thus reinforcing the understanding that he really was an enormous warrior. Right? So there's a handful of good reasons why we should understand that the traditional understanding of Goliath as a giant warrior isn't challenged by this coincidental statistic discovered at Tel Es Safi. But the key takeaway is that city was actually really huge. We're talking monumental stone blocks. We're talking large scale construction, right? This is no small city. And that was the whole excitement of sort of digging to this level and making these discoveries, was finding that the place had these huge fortifications, that everything was on this grand scale. And again, we're not talking, you know, uh, 30 foot, 60 foot, giant warriors. We're talking about big people. Okay, if we take the earliest sources seriously, Goliath 6'9", so he's the size of an average NBA center, right? Um, so that's still a big deal in a time where people average, and I mean even Ken, I mean he was right to say these guys are less than 5.5 feet tall anyway, 5'3" on average. So yeah, that's still a big deal. And we can still call them giants in light of the cultural norms of the day.